Hey, welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. This is your host, Francis Tapon. In this episode, I interviewed DJ Didonna. He is a Harvard Business School graduate who realized that working isn't that great. You know what? Yeah, you can make a lot of money. Yeah, you can work yourself to the grave. And for what? So he started questioning all this and took him down a profound journey of sabbaticals. And he is running the sabbaticalproject.org, which is a way to investigate what are sabbaticals about, what kind of impact do they have on both the employer and the employee, how do you take sabbaticals, what's the best practices that you should do, what in all his research surprised him, what's the future of sabbaticals. You don't want to miss this, unless of course you prefer working yourself into the grave. This episode was sponsored by TourRadar.com, and TourRadar.com is sponsoring an amazing contest just for us WanderLearn listeners. All you got to do to sign up is to go to TourRadar.com/WanderLearn to enter in. Every month, there's a new contest, and it's pretty amazing prizes. You get to go travel all over the world. You sometimes are given $1,000 in cash to go spend on travel. You're going to love the prizes there, and it costs you just sharing your email at TourRadar.com/WanderLearn. Enter in and win. You also went to Harvard Business School. I'm sorry for this. I apologize. Graduated in 2010. And then what did you do afterwards, and how did you get interested in sabbaticals? At what point? I mean, did you have to work like a few months after business school and you realized this fucking sucks? I need to take a break already.
Well, I think in retrospect, I've come to believe that business school is one of the most socially acceptable sabbaticals. I didn't think about it that way at the time. But
that's interesting, yeah.
If you think about it, you have permission to try out a bunch of other jobs. So the academic research calls it counterfactualization. So internships, going to info sessions, doing projects. And so you're actually trying out other ways to work. You're meeting people and learning about other opportunities out there that you might not have known about, right? So you're kind of opening the aperture of like what the possibilities are for work and life for you.
And I think that's especially true with business school as opposed to other graduate schools, because other graduate schools, let's say being going to law school or going to medical school, you have a very targeted window of like opportunities that you can do. Of course, you can do anything in theory, but it's much more limited. Business is like all encompassing. Exactly. You can really go to nonprofits. You can go to almost any industry on the planet.
Right. Which I think is what also makes it a good learning experience for figuring out what you want to do, because then you meet teachers, you meet people from the military. You get to see a lot more than I think most people are exposed to in their college experiences or how they're growing up. And the work that I'm doing around sabbaticals really comes from the root of like, how did people come into this journey around work? How did they think about their choices and how to approach work, which then ultimately leads them to taking a sabbatical, at least the folks I'm interviewing.
Step back. So right before business school, what were you doing?
I worked for a startup called Angie's List in Indianapolis,
Indiana.
Indiana.
List. Yeah. It was one of the original big lists. I mean, it was like Yahoo almost.
Yeah, exactly. So I joined, relatively early and kind of got that. I didn't study business in undergrad. It was political science and philosophy. So I kind of
where'd you go to undergrad?
Sorry?
Undergrad, where'd you go?
Notre Dame.
Okay, cool.
And so
I've heard they got a good football team. Is that just like propaganda?
It's taken me a long time to be able to miss watching a Notre Dame football game. I consider that to be a success.
Okay.
But
congratulations on your therapy.
So I kind of got my undergraduate business degree in the startup world, right? And then after trying to start a company and having it go relatively well, and then kind of getting like a cease and desist letter for like the copyright infringement, I was like, I don't think I actually know what I'm doing in business. Maybe I should go and actually study some of this. So went to business school, and the idea was I wanted to figure out how to make an impact in the world and do something that mattered. And I wanted to do something more international in kind of scope and, continue on the entrepreneurial track. So
what, by the way, what surprised you about Harvard Business School when you got there that you didn't expect?
I think that upon visiting, I don't know, no one in my family has gone to Harvard. It wasn't a thing that was even kind of a possibility. And so the reason I got introduced to that network, I guess, was from Angie's List. So the CEO and the co-founder had both gone to business school, and the COO. And so they had kind of turned me on to just the idea. And I was part of an entrepreneurial fellowship in Indiana. So I was trying to fight brain drain and keep people in the state, because there's a lot of great universities, but often people would go to Chicago or move elsewhere. So those are the Orr Fellowship. And
that's such an interesting concept, that a state is fighting brain drain. I always think of like countries or even continents fighting brain drain. But of course, it makes sense that even in the States, there's brain drain going on. And, like the people in Mississippi, all their geniuses don't stick around in Mississippi.
Yeah, and I think Indiana has a history of doing a really good job at that. And right now they have TechPoint Foundation, which tries to identify folks and get them doing summer internships in the state. So all about trying to show folks who aren't from there what's great about it, and grow the economy. And it's a great community. And so that was kind of my introduction to business school. And I remember you asked what I was surprised about. I went to visit Harvard Business School, and I was just surprised that the people there did not come off as how I would have assumed that Harvard people would have come
like
off. Like
cocksuckers?
Your words, not mine. So it was great to be there, and just see that folks seemed relatively confident and not competitive against each other, and I think also it's large enough that there's enough people in your niche that you'll find 6 people that are interested in access to finance and emerging markets. I have 1,000, and so if you went to a school of 200 people, there would be 0.5 of those people or something. Right. So there was a niche, and I kind of came in wanting to do that and access to finance, and as a measure to give people a way to kind of contribute as humans to the world, and found them. And so then started a company with a professor and his PhD student from the Kennedy School, so from the policy and kind of economics, international development side. And so, to answer your first question about how I got obsessed with sabbaticals, it wasn't as though I was always thinking I would take one. I was thinking, great, this is my dream job. I'm starting a company that makes a difference in people's lives. It's for profit. It's fast growth. It's exciting. I'm getting to travel and live all over the world. So I lived, Kenya and South Africa and Indonesia, and our company was based in Peru. It totally leveled up my international experience and exposure, and everything was going great. So about 5-6 years in, my co-founder and I kind of looked at each other at a board meeting, and we're like, man, this is really tiring.
We have no fucking life.
It's actually, so yes, but also, and I think this would resonate with you, we had an amazing life. But it was this life that didn't have a lot of room for things that were really important, right?
So what do you mean by that?
So I would be asking myself, at one point we were kind of, our rest of world headquarters was in Boston, and I'd ask myself, hey, this company wants you to come and do a presentation in Moscow, right? And you're gonna meet with the biggest bank in Russia, and then like the second biggest credit bureau in the world. Or you could, stay in Boston over the weekend. And so I think I'm going to fly to St. Petersburg and take the train to Moscow and, learn a lot, get to have an amazing education in the rest of the world. I would, it's difficult not to take that choice every time.
Of course. Yeah. It's addictive.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we looked
But then eventually you got burnt out.
Yep. And I didn't know what that was, right?
You didn't know what burnout was.
Yeah, because I think I had just been this person who was, maniacally driven and focused to accomplish, and that was part of my identity.
This is
like,
a common trait among Harvard Business School people. They may not all be cocksuckers, but they're all very driven.
Yeah, and I found myself not knowing why I wasn't energized to do the thing that was objectively my dream job. And if that thing is no longer energizing me, and I'm no longer happy doing that kind of puts you into a tailspin. Like, this is not satisfying. Like, I don't know what knob I would turn to solve that problem, right? And so, I think the seed for the idea to take a sabbatical was I had a friend getting married in Portugal, and my other friend had just finished med school, and I was like, hey, you want to go walk the Camino? I've got like 5 days, and we can like walk part of the Camino, and then I'll go to the wedding in Portugal, and you go off on your trip. And so
he's talking about El Camino de Santiago
de
Compostela,
yes,
in northern Spain. Yes. The Compostela. Yeah. You get the stamp.
And I was like, great,
And by the way, most people walk about 900 kilometers roughly. Mm-hmm. But you're right. You can just do 100, and that's good enough to get this to go to heaven.
Mm-hmm. So I've got that going for me.
That's right.
But it was typical trying to shoehorn in something. Well, I can do a part of it, and I'll shoehorn this into my wedding weekend, and after that, I'll go on this business trip. It was kind of like indicative of my lifestyle at that point. Right. And because we only had 4 or 5 days, we were walking like 40, 50 kilometers a day. We were just doing some crazy stuff, and we hadn't trained. And I mean, as you know, the best way to sideline yourself is to take off way too many miles at the beginning of a trip. Yes. And so we did that, and my buddies had like a foot fracture, and we had to get like a hotel in Santiago, and it was just kind of a mess. And you're talking to all these people who'd done the entire Camino, and they kind of look at you, they're looking down at you like, oh, you started in Syria.
Yeah. You little cheater.
And so I'm thinking like, this is ridiculous. I've been underinvesting in my kind of spirituality and like that kind of religious search.
Are you, by the way, are you an atheist or are you religious? So what was your...
I grew up Catholic, and then,
I'm sorry.
And then went to Notre Dame and converted to footballism, and then spent a lot of time in Africa and actually have been on this kind of journey. I've always been kind of on a journey, but I was very proudly Jesuit raised, and so that really instilled in me, I think, this sense of service to others. That was like very early on. We would take a month in high school, like you would do like service for a month. You wouldn't be going to school. So like there's aspects of that tradition which are really meaningful to me. Mm-hmm. And so, I was like, I'd really like to.
But you felt, but in your 20s, you felt like you had completely neglected this side that you had at least pursued to some extent.
Exactly.
As a child.
And the search itself, right? I mean, the search, it doesn't, I guess for some people it might, but it wasn't just kind of like coming in and taking over. You have to actively go out and perform that search and kind of, figure it out for yourself. And so that's rarely going to be urgent, though I thought it was important. And so in order to do something that's important but not urgent, how are you gonna walk the Camino, which is 6-8 weeks? I'm not sure how long folks normally take it.
Something like 6 weeks. A lot of people do it in a month.
Right. How are you gonna do that on a regular vacation schedule and with normal responsibilities? So that kind of got my wheels turning to say, all right, I want to invest more in this kind of spiritual exploration side. I want to do something like this, but I also wanted to see a different part of the world. I'd been to Europe a fair amount, and I also wanted to kind of help me explore Buddhism a bit more. And so, did some light Googling, which turned out to be way too light for the amount of preparation I needed for the trip, and found out about this pilgrimage in Japan on the island of Shikoku. Mm-hmm. So it's this like you visit 88 temples around this island, and it's kind of honoring the person that brought Buddhism from China to Japan, Kobodaishi. And so you're like visiting these 88 temples and, various rituals and sleep under bridges and all that fun stuff. So, I was like, okay, I've kind of made the decision that I'm going to kind of take a little step away from work. And I've made the decision on here's an anchoring kind of task I'm going to do on this time off.
This was your first sabbatical.
Correct.
And so, and repeat again the number of days that you were going to be running around these 88 temples?
It's about 800 miles. It took me 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Yeah.
And so, and you didn't do a ton of preparation for it, and it turned out to be harder than you expected in many ways. Where did it push you and pull you, and where did you suffer?
It's a good question. There were very few times I felt like I wasn't suffering.
Where did you have happiness? That'll be a shorter conversation.
I think what I can say is that the pilgrimage itself is broken up into 4 prefectures. So there's kind of like 4
zones.
Yeah, of the island, and they each have a theme, which I obviously can't remember right now. It was a broader theme of my pilgrimage is that I didn't speak Japanese, so I wasn't learning.
Well, what percentage of the people who are actually doing this pilgrimage that did speak Japanese? Are the majority foreigners or the majority Japanese?
I met one person in 6 weeks that I spoke English with.
Wow.
So it's most the super majority of people doing this pilgrimage are retired Japanese people who are going on tour buses that whisk you from temple to temple to temple, and you do it maybe you take a series of weekends and you do it. Right?
Oh.
And then there's people that maybe 5% of people are walking it, and then there's like the less than 1% of foreigners who, I think I've spent a lot of time traveling around the world, not as much as you have, but Japan is a place that makes you feel like an absolute infant. Like you cannot do anything yourself, and you're doing everything wrong, and you don't understand why it's wrong, but you know that it's wrong, in like a very humbling and interesting way.
It's the most fascinating country on the planet. I really think so. And I've been to 122, and there's nothing like Japan. Japan is just from another planet. It's a fascinating place. So you went on this pilgrimage. You suffered greatly, but you also grew. It transformed you. How did it transform you?
So, at about the middle between the 3rd and the 4th prefecture, you're right across the bay from Hiroshima. And so, I could see on my map, I could walk, a few miles and go to the ferry terminal and just go to Hiroshima. I was like, I should probably, I want to see Hiroshima. And so that was the first time I kind of picked my head up from what I was doing, walking for a month straight, picked my head up and said, like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this?
You stopped being a robot?
Yeah, exactly. I'd stopped kind of pursuing the pilgrimage in the same way that I pursued things in my life, which is just like, okay, here's the task. Even though I had had days where I was injured and people, putting me up in the hospital and my feet were duct taped, it never kind of occurred to me to stop doing it. I was like, well, I mean, I finish and then I'll do something else. Right. But why was I doing it at the frenetic pace that I was doing it at? Why was I rushing? Why was I interacting with it like a thing to accomplish? And so that actually let me step back and say, like, okay, goal for part 4 of 4 is now to just try to be more present and enjoy it and like savor what I'm doing. And so that was like the learning then came from not only identifying that was how I approached it to date, but then failing at changing my approach in part 4. And so at the end of that, you get to the 88th temple. It's at this, maniacally difficult mountain you have to walk up. And I got there. I was like, okay, well, I failed to change my approach. Is there a lesson that I can learn from that? And I think what I took from it was that, okay, I'm going to arrive at the end, 3 days sooner than how I had thought when I was going to change my approach. And so I will take those days and then I will use them in a way to prepare other pilgrims. They call them Hinro. And so I went to the first temple and just kind of sat there, and I'd made little care packages with, granola bars and messages and things like that to give to folks.
It's amazing when you, as a thru hiker, somebody as myself, after you've done a thru hike, you know exactly what people need in the journey. You're like, you need a Snickers bar. That's what you really need for enlightenment at this point of the journey. And you're just like, you really realize the value of a shower, or like, yes, you need a shower or a home cooked meal or whatever it is that has been lacking. And until you've done it, you don't realize how these things. So it's great that you did this. You kind of like realize, okay, I'm going to help future pilgrims by putting together these little care packages and give back that way.
And so it's relatively small, but I think it was illustrative of, in general, I think what a sabbatical helps you do, which is it allows you this kind of distance and perspective to step out from just how you are living on a day-to-day basis. Absolutely. And then take that into consideration as you make your future decisions. Right. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do something that much different. But I think there's value in stopping, and there can be potential value, and I think a greater likelihood to change if you actually notice that about yourself versus just kind of existing in that mode.
Did you take another sabbatical after that? What year was that when you went to Japan?
It's 2017. Okay,
so it's recent, relatively recent. So in the last couple of years, what have you been doing?
So I came back from that, and basically what I decided to do was I decided to leave my company that I started, right? And so
this is the one that you went to Moscow for a day and all that stuff, right?
Right. So it was credit scoring in emerging markets. So trying to create data and information about entrepreneurs and individuals in emerging markets so that banks could lend to them.
What was the name of the company?
EFL, Entrepreneurial Finance Lab.
Okay. And so then you decided to step away, and I'm going to leave this company. Right. This baby that you had created, that you had nurtured, and devoted a large portion of your life to. And then what did you do? This was in 2018?
2017. So I only took 4+ months off, right? So it was like a pretty concentrated dose. And I think the important thing there, for me at least, was that I stepped away not knowing what would happen, right? It wasn't clear that the company was going to be, a total success. It wasn't clear it was going to be, whether it would fail. And so I had to leave with that uncertainty, saying that I don't know how this is going to turn out. And I don't know how my departure is going to impact that. However, I need to kind of prioritize myself in a way.
But the company had already been surviving for 4 months without you.
Right. And I think that's another key piece about, what this means for companies, is, identifying that kind of key personnel risk. And so could I have gotten rid of those responsibilities by just telling the rest of my team, like, I don't want to do this right now, or, okay, we're going to hire someone to do this? Probably not totally, right? Because they're always going to kind of fall back on you. And even my departure date for the sabbatical was pushed 3 months, because, something always comes up. Something's always around the corner. Great opportunities, right? And opportunities that are in a sense, self-inflicted wound. Since I'm the co-founder, I'm like, well, I value this quite highly, so I'm going to do that. And so never a great time, never the right time. And then when you take the time off, life goes on.
Right.
So
it is also kind of humbling. And maybe for some founders, it can be a big ego thing to think that, no, the company can't survive without me. And all of a sudden they step away, let's say for medical reasons for a couple of months, and they realize, shit, in some cases the company actually does better without me. That's really like a real humbling situation.
Bringing up medical is a good point, because that comes up in the majority of people that we interview about taking sabbaticals. There's not much that is going to force someone to take a step back that's more effective than a medical issue. So either their own health or someone else. You often hear of, close friend or family member passing away, and like that's the thing that snaps people out of their kind of road.
It's sad that it takes death. I mean, either actual death or the very real threat of death to wake people up. But that's just the reality of, I guess, the way we're wired as a species or something like that. Because I know I do it myself. I've said this many times that I obsess about death. I think about death every single day, my own death. And that's what keeps me motivated. That's what keeps me focused. And because it's such a powerful tool to use in a positive way, is your own mortality. Right. And I think so many people just push it aside and don't even think about it. And they're like, they live life as if they're going to live forever. And then they don't live up to what they believe in or what they really want in life. Mm-hmm. It's very sad, but you're right. It's something that can kind of wake people up, and then all of a sudden realize maybe I should take a sabbatical.
Right. So I think what you're talking about, the Stoics have a phrase called memento mori, right? So it's this kind of nightly review back on like what's happened during the day, and reminding yourself that you will die, right? That will come, not in a negative sense, but how are you going to maximize this time? What did you do? Are you spending it in a way that's the way that you want to? I think, to your point, the reason why I think the research we're doing is exciting is that is true. People will not take that break unless death or something befalls them. Or the other side of the coin is, if a company says we have a sabbatical policy, then it's a very easy decision. I spend a lot of time asking people, like, what was the straw that broke the camel's back? Like, what, and when you ask that question,
make them take a sabbatical.
Yeah. And you get some great stories, right? Like I'm in some meeting about, like tech infrastructure, and I'm looking around and being like, I'm out of here,
But other times it's death.
Other times it's death. It's, in my case, kind of like burnout and just, this kind of vicious cycle of not bringing your best self to work. And then you're feeling bad about that. I mean, it's, burnout was just added into kind of the WHO. Like this is an epidemic. This is a health issue, right? That people are experiencing globally. But when you ask people whose company has a sabbatical policy, right? The U.S. Treasury has a leave without pay program, right? Where you keep benefits, you keep your kind of standing and stature, and you can take up to a year off. When you ask people that have something like that, they're like, well, the reason I took it is because they have the policy. It's very non-controversial, and they don't get themselves to the point where they're burnt out or an emergency has befallen, and they actually can, I think, enjoy their time off more because they're not trying to heal themselves and scramble around and, essentially pull the parachute.
But if you were to examine, and maybe you've already done this, but if you were to examine 1,000 companies that have, companies that have at least 1,000 employees or more, so big companies, what percentage of them actually have a sabbatical policy? Because I imagine small companies, they just don't have it. So if a company is going to have a sabbatical policy, it's going to be a big Fortune 500 company. And what of the Fortune 500? How about that? Do you think maybe 10 companies have a sabbatical policy? I mean,
one of the reasons why I'm kind of going on this journey with sabbaticals is because there's not a lot of good information out there. So you can find articles that say 14% of the top 100 companies have sabbatical policies. What is the definition of a sabbatical? I mean, I'm working with a Fortune 100 company that is launching a sabbatical policy that's like 3 weeks every 5 years. Is that a sabbatical? Is that a vacation? So like, number one, the information is just not really out there. There's no consensus on what a sabbatical is or best practices. Number two, on your kind of assumption that like large companies would have it and small companies wouldn't, one of the most fascinating things about this research and interviews and discovery I've been doing is that there are a lot of exceptions. Most people assume that there's, it's paid sabbatical. What are you talking about? So I've seen law firms that have, mandatory sabbaticals for partners, right? Seen, financial advisory firms that have mandatory sabbaticals. I've seen large companies that have sabbatical policies and small companies that have sabbatical policies. I've seen nonprofits and for-profits. And so
that's interesting. I would not have guessed that at all. Yeah. So that's very counterintuitive, at least counterintuitive to my brain.
Right.
But yeah.
And so if you believe that it's a good thing, which, I want to talk about kind of what your catalyst, what your breaking point was. If you believe that's a good thing, then, for example, they have the McGregor Foundation in Detroit has this thing called the Miller Fellowship. And so they have a set of investees, nonprofits, and as soon as those nonprofit leaders reach a decade of service, they offer a paid sabbatical. So a year, 18 months, right? Why would a nonprofit do that? I think most people would assume there's no way that a nonprofit would do that, right? I mean, you think about a nonprofit leader as being like overworked and super passionate. Who could possibly step into their role? Well, if you're the funder, you want to make sure that someone can step into their shoes when they when they leave, when they die, when they move on, whatnot. So it's actually, I'm looking for and spreading the learnings about organizations that see the reason why you should have sabbatical policies, and have it themselves.
That's a really good point you bring up, DJ, because this whole idea that people have to, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, and you don't want to have people in the company be indispensable. Nobody should be indispensable, and so everybody should be replaceable, ideally for the company's sake.
Right.
And one way to verify that the person is indispensable is to make them go away for several months,
right,
and see if she comes back and she's like, okay, well, we survived without her for 3-4 months, so obviously she's not indispensable.
One of the people that I interviewed is the co-founder and I don't know if it's superintendent or executive president of a boarding school in Africa, right? And so this person's been there for a decade. They've done amazing stuff, educated thousands of leaders, and he took a sabbatical. And it was only, one of those folks that just knows everything that's going on in the organization. They're like the beating pulse of the organization. And through taking that time off and coming back, he was able to realize these things go really well when I'm gone, and maybe better than when I'm here. And I didn't have any input on them, right? That's fine. This thing went really poorly. And he would not have known that had he not taken that step back. Yeah. So I think, especially, founder syndrome and people who have all this institutional knowledge, they get leaned upon, I think, quite frequently, more frequently than they would know. Yeah. Talked to another CEO in actually the Bay Area that runs a school lunch distribution company. And it was through taking that time off that they realized just how decisions are made in the organization. And that, to date, because it was a fast growing company, but also very kind of top heavy as far as the decision making, they just hadn't empowered people to. And so what they found was that things didn't get done because they were waiting for approval. But when they talked about it, well, I would have said exactly what you wanted to do. Why didn't you just do it? And they realized that the structure for decision making wasn't put in place, so they would be empowered to make them. So I agree. In the absence of decision makers, in the absence of what was considered leaders, I think that's when you get an idea of what's actually going on. And so if you're an investor, if you're a funder, that should be near the top of your list to figure out how resilient is this organization without the leader.
Right. And that can be true whether it's a startup with maybe only 20 employees, as well as a company like Apple, which was at risk when they had Steve Jobs, who was such a cult leader, seemed irreplaceable. And to either way, you have to learn to live with that. Now, before we get too deep in this stuff, since you touched on this idea of definition and how little information there is about sabbaticals out there. How about we start at square 101, which is, what the fuck is a sabbatical? Does it, because in Europe, for example, many Europeans get 6 weeks vacation. And in fact, if you go to Europe in August, there's nobody working in the whole continent. I'm of course exaggerating, but the point is that Europe, so to me, a sabbatical has to be at least a month. But what about? But you've done so much more research on this topic than me. So what would you say is, when does the sabbatical start?
It's a tricky topic, because I think that number one, people use the word sabbatical because I think it has this connotation of prestige. And you can say, like, I'm not working, I'm on a sabbatical, versus I'm not working, I'm wandering around, you know.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So
well, what about on vacation? I mean, does sabbatical sound cooler than being on vacation?
it depends on, I mean, I think there's stigma around taking vacation, right? I mean, you have all these companies that have unlimited vacation policies, and studies have shown that.
Who has unlimited vacation policies, and where can I apply?
Yeah, exactly. And studies have shown that people take less vacation.
Really? No, hold on. Did you just say, there's companies that have unlimited vacation?
Yeah, this is the terminology across the tech industry. It's, you know, it's like,
really?
We're not going to measure PTO. You have unlimited, just get your work done. And that kind of went
But it's like bullshit, basically?
I mean, you just as in sabbaticals, who's giving you the who's giving you the example of how much vacation to take off? So you can have an unlimited vacation policy. You can have,
but if your boss never takes a vacation,
exactly,
you're kind of fucked.
And so, you know, from the anecdotes that I've heard about Google's 20% policy, for example, is that it was like 100.
Sorry, explain what 20%, because not everybody knows what that is.
So you know, the idea was that you take Friday and the engineers are working on their own project, right? So like take 20% of your time and like work on something completely different than your workload. And you'll hear all the things, Google News, that product came out of the 20% time, whatnot. But like what it really was people working 120%. I mean, what did you produce on your 20% off? Well, I was working 100% of the time. Like, produce something more, right? So I think, you know, unlimited vacation policies, all these things, it kind of, like, work expands to fit the time that you're given. So all that to say that people use the term sabbatical. There's not an agreed upon definition that I know of. To me, the definition of sabbatical, and especially surfacing from these interviews, is three kind of principles. One is extended period of time, right? So if you say a month, you know, I would say at least a month. I think that from the interviews and the research we've done, it takes them a month, 2 months to just get out of work mode, work zone. Of course,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I said at least a month.
Yeah,
yeah, at least a month. It's just like, yeah, go ahead.
So extended period of time.
Mm-hmm. Which is a vague lawyerly term. So, I mean, that's why I'm trying to pin you down to an actual number of days or weeks or...
So, I mean, my belief on this is it has to be 6 months. I think that that gives you can't see the end of 6 months when you go into the beginning of it. It's just like an inconceivably long period of time. Gives you a couple months to unwind, to do things that take a lot of time. But, you know, not all people have 6 months. I've had folks say that there's something amazing about just taking a season, right? So 3 months. I've had folks that say it's something special about doing 9 months, right? Like, what can you create in your life? You know, like 9 months can create a lot of things. And so what can you create with your life? Folks, you know, on the academic calendar with their kids, they take a year, right? They travel and they align it to the school year, or the inverse of that, they take the summer, right? So extended period of time.
So for you, it's 6 months, but some people might define it as little as 1 or 2 months.
Yeah, I think ideally 6 months.
But the bottom line is there's just no agreed upon definition. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and I don't think it's helpful to tell people, like, to shame people. Like, this is not,
you
didn't quite get there.
Exactly.
You know, one of the lessons that we've learned is that, you know, any time you take off that's kind of extended outside of the realm of normal vacation is going to change your perspective towards work and time off in the future. And you'll probably take more of them, and they'll probably be longer as you feel more at comfort, at ease, without, you know, working in the more traditional way. So extended period of time in doing something intentionally, right? And so that intention could be, I want to recover my health. I'm going to do yoga classes or healing, or, you know, I'm going to learn how to dance, or I'm going to write a book or whatever, right? But there's an intention around it. And then that's off of routine work. And so people will say, well, you know, am I not allowed to work on the sabbatical? Like, I want to write a book. It's like, that's totally fine. You know, I think that, like, it is very human to want to produce work of some sort. And I think you can do work on yourself. I think you can, you know, I helped my dad remodel a house, you know, I mean, I worked with this nonprofit a bit. Like, I think there's like health in doing work, but as long as you're not doing your routine work, I think it allows you this kind of like objective stand back.
I'm going to give you a 15-second break to look over your notes because I need to do a plug-in and ad here. So speaking about sabbaticals, if you want to take a long vacation, go with tourradar.com/WanderLearn, and you will get a chance to win $1,000 in travel credits to travel wherever the hell you want. So again, go to tourradar.com/WanderLearn to enter in a contest to win $1,000 in travel credits. And now let's get back with DJ while we're talking about sabbaticals. And I want to get into the practical things of like, how will you be able to convince your employers? Because a lot of people are probably listening to us and you're like, you two privileged dudes talking about sabbaticals. I'm working at, I don't know, a grocery store or whatever I'm doing. And it's going to be impossible to convince my employer to take a sabbatical. So what do you say to those people who desperately would love to take a sabbatical? They think this is the coolest thing ever, but there's no way in hell. They've got a family, they got 3 children, they got a dog. What the hell do they do?
So this is the purpose behind this research organization, the Sabbatical Project. I think, we want to effect change about how our society treats time off work, right? Right now, I mean, the truth of the matter is, and you're talking to white guys who went to Harvard Business School next to each other, is that there's a lot of privilege there, right? So not only kind of monetary privilege and prestige of jobs or the ability to get other jobs, but also kind of personality privilege, right? Do you feel like you're a person that can take a risk? Was your upbringing one where you saw people taking risks and it turned out well for themselves? And so the moral of the story right now is that it's not available for everybody, right? And I think that there are things you can do to make it more possible. And I know you've talked about this in some of your talks before, but at the end of the day, you can manage your spending while you're on it. So does it actually cost that much money, or is it that people are kind of uncomfortable and unfamiliar with the prospect of not making money? That's an uncomfortable thing. But there are things you can do, where you're traveling. Are you renting out your house while you're gone? I think one of the interviewees, he was a CTO at a tech firm, and they went to an island in the north of the Arctic Circle in Sweden, and his wife was a teacher there, and so they lived on her kind of like teacher salary, and it helped him to reset his entire relationship to money. Like, well, we're able to live on this amount of money for an entire year. Wow, like that opens up a lot of options of what I thought I had to do to provide for my family when I get back, and et cetera. So I think understanding, preparing from a monetary perspective, if you want to take it and you can plan 5 years in advance, my kids are going to be 7 and 9. I want to do it before they get into middle school or high school. Then you're saving for something 5 years away versus getting yourself into a situation where it's tomorrow and you're trying to figure out how to make it work without any sort of money coming through. So I think money obviously plays a role here. The second thing is, can you slot it in between jobs, right? So you're not like burning the pier, you're quitting your job and blowing everything up, but saying, all right, when I look for the next job, I'm going to give myself 4 months, and 2 months I'm going to spend on sabbatical, not thinking about the next job, and the 2 months I'm going to spend doing that, right? Mm-hmm. And so could you imagine yourself saving for a few months, again, over the course of a long period of time to enable that to happen? And then it not only, I think, can kind of slot into one's resume, but also can give you something rather compelling to talk about when you're in that job search. I had a friend who was interested in government and civic tech, and he was like, I have any ideas of what I should do, where I should go on sabbatical? And I said, what is the place that's known for the most innovations in civic tech? And he goes, Estonia. I go, great. Go to Estonia for 7 days, at some point in your entire sabbatical, see how it feels to be there, talk to some folks, and then you control the narrative. Maybe you liked it and you stayed there longer. Maybe you didn't, but you learned something. And then every time you go into, which was essentially a career switch for him, you can talk about, well, here's what I learned in Estonia about their civic tech, and you already, have an interesting story that's going to set you apart. Did
he take you up on that challenge?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I beat him though, because I spent a whole fucking winter in Estonia. No. A winter in Estonia, ladies and gentlemen, is tough. Temperature is almost never above freezing, and it's dark as hell. Even when it's like the sun will come up around 9:30 in the morning, and it will go down around 3 p.m., and usually it's cloudy.
So what did you learn?
What I learned? That I like sun. No, actually, I learned that it was really not that bad. I was like, come on, if you can survive a winter in Estonia, it's really not that bad. And, I expected it to be much colder. I expected minus 40 degrees where it's minus 40 degrees outside. Now, the old timers told me that it used to be that cold but climate change is affecting the whole planet as well as Estonia. That as a result, they didn't have as many cold days. And just in general, I just didn't find it that big. I mean, electricity's changed. It's been such a game changer. I mean, like you can turn on lights anytime you want and have lights. I mean, people who survived in Estonia like 5,000 years ago, 500 years ago. I mean, that's impressive. Doing it nowadays, it's like any idiot can do that. But still.
The moral of the story, just so I can make sure to give an answer that's hopefully satisfying to more people, is that on how to kind of convince employers how to make it happen is just, I think the first step is people who have the ability to do so need to do so and talk about it. So one thing that we're finding is a lot of people have taken these periods of time off, but there's like a bit of a mixed stigma about like, you had to take time off, what's wrong, and also like a jealousy. And so they don't want to, yeah, exactly. Like trumpet how great, spending a bunch of time off is. I think the more that individuals and companies are talking about like, this is a thing that we think is important and we do it. And like, this is why, it becomes normalized. Right. And so that's the kind of first step, is trying to figure out like, people who have the privilege and the ability to do so, taking that time off. And that's where we're trying to kind of share and spread more stories. And then I think from there, it becomes something that people advocate for, right? I mean, we were not born with a 5-day work week and 2 days for the weekend. Like that had to be something that was fought for by labor unions and, folks of the religious persuasion over time to be able to get those days off. We have a summer in our academic calendars because of like the Prussian agricultural calendar from way back when, right? And so no one wants to give up that summer now, because that time is valuable, right? I mean, even though that, educational retention kind of slides over the summer and it's a pain for parents to have to like cart their kids around while they're trying to work, like time off and people thinking about what they enjoy doing as kids and having that space is important. And so that's not going anywhere. So similarly, we have to kind of fight that battle for, this is the definition of a healthy, successful life, is having, periods of time off.
I imagine the Europeans are so much more advanced at this than us workaholic Americans, or Japanese for that matter. They gotta suck too, because I mean the Japanese, they have a term of like being worked to death. I don't know if you know the term.
No, not off the top of my head.
But you know that there's such a term in the Japanese language that actually means like being worked to death, dying of work. I can't remember the word itself, but anyway, the work-life balance of the Europeans and certainly the Latin Americans is so much better, it seems, from far away at least.
Yeah, I think partially I totally agree and partially I disagree, because sometimes I get the reaction from Europeans, kind of scoff, like, oh, like we call that vacation, or as you said, taking August off is relatively commonplace in Sweden and things like that. But at the end of the day, and I don't know if you saw this article in the Atlantic on workism. No. This is kind of something that affects. It was basically kind of lamenting that in the good old days, the rich kind of landed gentry, like they would take a ton of time off. Their life was full of leisure, right? So how do we get to the point where when you were rich, you had a country home and a bunch of leisure, to you're rich and you like work yourself to the bone, like nothing is good enough, and that culture kind of like permeates downwards inside like the organizations, and then everyone's negatively infected by it, right? So I think among this kind of class of individuals that are working in these competitive jobs and go to competitive schools, like those people are not taking August off and twiddling their thumbs. Like they're also worried about not being able to take vacation. And even when you're on vacation, you have a phone now, and so work is always in your pocket. I think one interesting thing about what I found about Commonwealth countries is that, for example, Australia has this extended service leave concept. So all civil servants get this like months of extended service leave as part of their employment package, sabbaticals. And I had asked a friend, why is that, an Australian guy? He's like, oh, well, we just have a different relationship to work and time off than you Americans. Like, you guys are silly. As it turns out, it's because, it would take months for people to sail back and forth from England to the colonies. And so they would give their civil servants extended periods of time off to be able to transport themselves back and spend time with their families. And that's a vestige of that policy. No one's given that policy up anytime soon, because, having extended months off as a civil servant is a great thing to have, right? So I think that, one of the reasons why going from kind of mission-oriented work in my startup to this, I think people will look and say, like, well, what are you, just taking a vacation, writing about taking more vacations? Like, that doesn't seem to be very applicable. From my time, living and working in Indonesia, India, places like that, my experience is that those folks are not looking towards France and Sweden with how to evolve their economy and how much vacation to have. They're looking at the States, and China they're working super hard. Their work weeks are not any easier than ours, and they're certainly not carving out August to spend time up country, right? So I think this is an issue that we're maybe seeing the leading edge consequences of with burnout and that sort of thing. But it's going to affect the majority of the planet very quickly.
Some of the takeaways that you're learning so far in your research, because you've been at this research for how many months now?
Since the beginning of the year, so 9 months.
Okay, so 9 months. And so what has surprised you in your research so far?
I mean, I think that in general, number one, people use sabbaticals as a tool for change. And so we're still looking into kind of what the roots in the literature and psychology is, just about what are the components that lead to change. And some of the things that are surfacing in the research is people come back with a renewed sense of confidence, a higher risk tolerance, because they're realizing actually I took a few months off and my life is fine. It's maybe better. And so I'm not going to be afraid of that. And then also perspective. So they're gaining perspective of their life that they hadn't gained before, right? Being able to step back. And so I think those three things combined means that people are more willing to make a change in their life, and the magnitude of the change, right, can be much larger. So it doesn't mean everyone comes and quits their job and becomes a writer. It means that people can either more likely to make a tweak, such as just how hard they work or how much time they take off. For example, an entrepreneur that took time off came back, and the next company that they started, they gave summers off because his wife was a teacher, and he was like, this is kind of nice. I want to spend the summers with my kid. I only have X additional summers before they leave to go off to college. And so our company gets summers off. All employees have summers off.
Imagine if Google did that. Google will not be working for the summertime. Use Bing search engine to search for something else. Use the Yahoo search engine for that.
Well, I mean, to me, it's funny you mentioned that because I've been thinking about how does that work? And Google has employees in Southern Hemisphere. Those people, their summers and their school time off is totally different. And so I think if that's important to us as humans, then you make it happen. It's certainly that is not an output of capitalism. Hey, as you get to a certain level of productivity, then all of a sudden you start maximizing leisure and health.
Absolutely. I mean, what you say is so true. It's just that, some people think that there's this dogma, but if capitalists was truly as bloodthirsty as it is, maybe we would go all 7 days a week. And some people, of course, do work 7 days a week, but, there is this, we as a society choose to, and it's just completely arbitrary that we work 5 days. I'm sure we could structure our society that we only work 2 days a week and we take 5 days off. We wouldn't produce as much stuff and as much output if we only work 2 days a week as a complete planet. Right. But I don't think we would, maybe we might starve a little bit. We might be hungry. I mean, the farmers wouldn't be working. But do you see what I'm saying? It's just it's kind of just, if an alien landed here, it's okay, why are you guys working 5 days a week and why not 4 or 6? Exactly. Or,
as I've started to think about...
And back in the old days, everybody worked probably 7 days a week. I don't know. I'm guessing in the Middle Ages. I mean, you worked when the farm was needed to be worked on.
Exactly. Back to the Prussian agricultural calendar informing, our kind of school schedule. I mean, one of the surprises just in general is that I spend a lot of my time feeling as though I'm arguing for the value of taking time off, which is weird, right? I mean, if you put someone in a room and you say hey, did you like your last vacation? Yeah, of course. Hey, do you think you should have more vacation? Absolutely. And then you put people together and you put them in charge of a company and they're well, we have to make the numbers work and can you imagine, right? And so it is funny to say okay, can we just agree that there are things you'd like to do in your life that you can't do with the current structure of time off? And if you zoom out, again, taking your alien example, and you say, okay, here's how we've set up work. You go to school for 12 years, and then you graduate, and you're 20-ish, 22. And then for the next 40 years, you work. And the most time you're ever going to take off during that time is 2 weeks in a row, and that's pretty rare. That okay, and then you die, and you might not even make it to then. Yeah, you might die. And you might get there guess what? The retirement age is pushed out 10 years. So I like to think about the inverse of like, not why should we take sabbaticals, or how can we take sabbaticals? It's like, how did we get to the place where, I had never taken more than 2 weeks off after a decade in the workforce. I went from internship to grad school to starting a company to, that doesn't seem right. I think some of the benefits that people talk about, there's this term that just keeps coming up, which is humanity. I remember a woman was talking about how she was working for this consulting firm, and, she would wake up at 6 and like work, until like 6, and then have dinner, and then she'd go to the gym afterwards so she could like not be tired, so that she could stay up past midnight so that she could do it all over again. And she described kind of, being in the locker room in the gym and kind of looking at herself. And just the thing that came to her mind was, I am not a machine. Like, that is a thing that a machine does. It's like lubricate the joints, and then, you start over and fire it up and go. There's this notion that I can't quite find a good terminology for. I'll use what the people are saying in the interviews. It's just humanity. There's a humanity in, being able to have time to be there for your family when someone's sick. Or, I helped my cousin move just because I had excess time, and I could go and fly to where my cousin was and help them move. Or, I helped my, one of my parents with a health issue. And like that's what being human is about. It's about relationships. It's about time. And I think we've all seen the movie about what happens when you just, turn working up to 11. It doesn't bring happiness.
Right. Unless... it might bring some happiness for some people if they're truly passionate about their work. If they're utterly obsessed, if they're an astronomer and they just love doing it, they're going to be working on the Cassini space probe, and they're going to be working for the next 10 years. So as it's flying to Cassini or to wherever, to Saturn. And that's just, so maybe it brings fulfillment to those, but for many people.
Yeah. I mean, I'll put it this way. If you look at like the longitudinal studies, like the Grant study at Harvard, right? Like, no one is sitting on their deathbed saying, I wish I'd worked 5% more. Right. Even folks that are, so
even the ultra-achievers or whatever.
Do I need everyone in the world to say, do I think that everyone in the world needs to take a sabbatical? No. If you don't want to take a sabbatical, don't take a sabbatical. But what I have found is that I've been thinking about what's another thing that humans could do, that could have access to, that every person who's done it says that is a fantastic thing to do. I gather the super majority of people that have kids would say like, yeah, like pros and cons, but on net, I'm really glad that I did that. Right. But I've been trying to find those folks. And even if I've interviewed people that have literally gotten divorced on sabbatical. I've interviewed people whose parents passed away on sabbatical, like from really tough stuff. Those people say like, well, yeah, that would have happened otherwise. And I'm really glad that I got to have that time to sit with that, or to be with the people that matter to me.
And we take a quick commercial break to mention that Tour Radar is having a contest where you can win $1,000 if you apply at tourradar.com/WanderLearn. It's your chance to get $1,000 worth of travel credits, and you can travel anywhere in the world using one of Tour Radar's thousands and thousands of tours that they have. So go to tourradar.com/WanderLearn to enter in for your chance, and you will not regret it. Okay, we're back with DJ. And we're talking about sabbaticals. And DJ, I want to ask you about Bulgaria. They have a lot of vacation time. And if you add up all their unpaid leave and all their time free, they have like almost 2 months. That's a lot. And they topped the poll. And I think it was The Economist. I can't remember exactly. And my question is that let's say there was some sort of nirvana perfect society. Let's call it Estonia for just sake of argument, that offered all its citizens sabbaticals. Like every 5 years, you can take 6 months off. Would that society suffer from productivity issues? Would it GDP decline? Would, before you know it, end up at the GDP of Burkina Faso?
Well, I remember an anecdote about wartime Britain where they did a experiment. So they're obviously trying to get as much productivity as possible on their munitions manufacturing, right? So you had mobilized the entire country, and you're saying, all right, here's how many hours you work per day. Here's how many hours you work per day, right? This is right after the kind of Industrial Revolution. So they hadn't quite tweaked that productivity engine. And obviously they found declining productivity if you push, over a certain number of hours. And so I think that's kind of one of the ways that we got this 45 hour work week. I think that the concept that we have honed productivity and we are doing a great job in places like the States is based on inertia. It's not based on data. You can look at a country like Sweden or like France, as you say, how are they doing on a GDP per capita basis, based on what they kind of have as the amount of vacation days and taking August off and things like that. So in the European Union, you have more paid parental leave, right? I mean, the U.S. is catching up to Europe on a lot of these measures, and I think that you could play a game about who has higher GDP capita between the U.S. and Europe, but I don't think that you would be sacrificing a tremendous amount to go down to the lowly GDP per capita of Germany, where what you gain from working in Germany is a lot of sanctioned, state-sanctioned and mandated amount of time off. So I think that additionally, what we're now dealing with is this notion of productivity that's not just connected to the amount of hours you spend in the office, but it's also connected to the amount of hours that you're able to disengage from work and look at the device in your pocket and things like that. So, I don't think that comparing to how we've done things in the past is a great kind of indicator of whether it's producing healthy outcomes and how we should do stuff in the future, especially as we get more and more automated and more the ability for a lot of the economy to operate geographically apart from coworkers and the office itself. So I think that the opportunity here is for companies to experiment with, okay, like what does this do for our workforce? And I mean, if you look at companies here in the Valley, I mean, the average tenure of new employees at places like Google and Facebook is sub 3 years, right? And so that GDP per capita argument, I think, falls apart pretty quickly if you're able to move the needle and have someone stay for 5 years or 4 years instead of 3 years, right? If you just think about the amount of money and time they spend training. So, I mean, one of the reasons we're doing this, again, is to try to bring a data-based approach to this concept. And so we want companies to run experiments. We're working with a professor at HBS, Ashley Willens, to identify companies that are want to take a database rigorous approach to their time off policies and figure out what's working and how they can benefit from having policies like this in the future.
Any big pioneering companies that you have noticed that are doing a interesting job or noteworthy job regarding this policy?
So the research on companies is slated to start in 2020. So I have a lot of anecdotes, right?
Okay.
I have, you take even companies like McKinsey and Bain that have, take time programs or 80-20 programs or working 20% less. And I think that, there's law firms and this kind of like services oriented field can actually sub people in and out relatively well. But yeah, there's a lot of kind of disparate examples. And what we're trying to do is bring those together, give them a bit of a mouthpiece and a megaphone on what's going on and make it, possible and give people permission to set up more policies.
Yeah. Is there something that you would call into question this whole notion of even paying attention as much as we do about GDP? There's getting pushback of, like the Bhutan is asking for gross happiness product, gross happiness index, and others. People are just questioning the whole notion of productivity of like, why is this the big goal? Mm-hmm. Why is this even important?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to spend a lot of time online to see all the recent studies about burnout and occurrences of depression and anxiety. I mean, we 100 years ago economists were forecasting that we would have 14-hour work weeks, right? We haven't gone in that direction. Like as we've gained more productivity, we've reinvested into producing more, not working less. And I don't think that's demonstrated to be a recipe for happiness. So I think other countries are starting to look. I mean, obviously, the gross national happiness gets a fair amount of airplay. But again, you don't have to look at countries that are doing something extremely crazy. Look to Europe and look at kind of policies they have for workers and think about how something that I think everyone can sit on the same side of the table and say, we value, the creation of human life and having kids, right? And also a place like the States has some of the worst parental leave and, maternity leave guaranteed in the world. Like that doesn't make any sense, right?
Right. We're the richest society, and yet we have mental illnesses up the wazoo of people who are just burnt out and overworked. And I just know it affected, let's say, my wife, Rejoice. She came from Africa, and she's just like, utterly stunned by how productive Americans are, like how workaholic they are and how go achievement oriented compared to Africa. I mean, she's been to 31 or 32 African countries, and she was born and raised there, and she looks at the pace of life there and how much they're taking sabbaticals, not because it's organized, but just because they may be unemployed for many months or even years. And but regardless, there's just this, we sometimes lose sight of how hard, incredibly hard Americans work, and compared to other societies. I think only the Japanese might outdo us.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a question to me of productivity versus busyness, right?
That
and
too.
So I think that I definitely think that Americans are really busy,
yeah,
maybe busier than most. I mean, I spent from living in Southern and East Africa. I mean, I've seen people with incredible work ethics and societies and cultures with incredible work ethics that a lot of it is exacerbated by the amount of time you have to spend in traffic or and so like a lot of the work ethic is directed towards like dealing with some of the structural like hurdles to living in places like that.
You're right. Yeah.
And so, but I think that we kind of have a self-inflicted wound.
I remember this one guy, he's from Benin. He told me that when he went to America, he had budgeted 4 hours to do something. Like, I can't remember what he was trying to do. Probably he got a license or something like that. And he's like, I couldn't believe it only took 30 minutes. Because in Benin, it would have taken 4 hours. It would have taken half of his day just to do the simple task because the infrastructure sucks, and just like the bureaucracy is horrendous and the efficiency is low, and on. But or the electricity may not be working that day, and it's crazy. I mean, anyway. So, what do you hope, or do you think is going to happen? Now in these 2020 election cycle, there's this one candidate, but and other people are talking about this universal basic income. I don't know how much it's tied into sabbaticals, but do you have an opinion about this? Because maybe some people see a correlation between the two. I don't even know if it's a correlation. It just popped into my head.
Yeah.
The UBI, universal basic income, is this notion that seems as modern as or innovative as promoting sabbaticals.
First of all, I think the concept of a sabbatical is like quite old, in the sense that the word Sabbath, right, has biblical roots, and you work 6 days, you create the world, you rest, right? You have a day a week where you're kind of worshiping, and so like that concept, think in agriculture, like the fallow year, right? So you don't farm, right? I mean, like this concept of rest is actually, I think, an ancient concept that we've actually lost. I don't think that we're creating it or discovering it. This notion of there is something else that's important out there in the world besides like productivity or work or whatever, right? So I do think it's a bit more of a rediscovery. There's a lot of things that are competing for our attention and want us to be engaged in things and on our phones. There's not a lot of things that are saying like, hey, maybe you should take a few months and not be productive. I think that does it relate to universal basic income? I'm not sure. I mean, again, I want to make sure that this is seen as kind of an essential part of kind of human wellness and development. I have this kind of idea of being a way station, or like a hut to hut trek, right, where you have various moments in your life and times in your life where you're working on something, and I think it's good to stop maybe at the peak of that mountain and look and say, like, how did that go? Like, how do I want to continue to climb? Am I on the right mountain or the wrong mountain, right? And I think there's, you look at some societies like Israel and some of the Commonwealth countries, Australia, the UK, they have this concept of gap years, which I think the prevalence and acceptance of that has changed a lot in the States over the past decade or so. You have companies like Global Citizen Year that actually like enable people to take these gap years, and I think that's a great time to take time off. I think, as we said, business school is like a good moment early in someone's career to say, okay, here's what my parents said I should study economics, and I got a job with a consulting firm. Here's what I've been doing. How does that sit with who I am and what I want to do, right? And kind of like stop and look around. I think I can imagine, folks that have kids. I've friends and people I've interviewed who've taken those kind of like parental leave off to be with their family unit and say, like, I'm going to go away from my normal life, and we're going to sit and figure out like, what does this mean for us, and how do we want to be parents, and to really kind of like stay kind of focused on that and present. I can imagine people that, empty nest syndrome, your kids leave, right? Like that's a big tweak in your life. And so are you being intentional about like what that means and planning for the future? Some of the most inspiring interviews I do are with folks with kids. Right. I interviewed a CEO who took their 3 kids on a 2-month-long road trip around like 25 national parks in the Western United States, right? So it's him and his wife, his kids. And that creates memories that last a lifetime, that transformed his relationship to his individual kids in a way that he just had never taken that amount of time just in a regular day-to-day work. So my question is just, like I would like to see people thinking that you can take blocks of time over the course of your life and be intentional about that time and use it for whatever you have available for yourself at that time. So can everyone, walk the Camino or walk across Japan? Like absolutely not, right? Can someone get value taking their kids and spending a couple months with them? It's fantastic, right? It's not the same as sipping a coconut on a beach, but it does different things, right? People who take extended honeymoons and say like, I've just, kind of pledged my life to this other human being. Let's explore the world together and figure out what we want to do and what we want to create.
I remember when 2008 happened and Obama had just been elected, and there was this phrase that people kept saying, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. You don't want to waste a crisis because it's a great chance to kind of reshuffle the deck and reorganize yourself, because people are more lenient to do radical changes when there's radical problems going on. And it kind of reminds me to some extent about sabbaticals. It's like when people quit their job or change jobs or they get fired or whatever, it's a terrible thing to just the next week to start a brand new fucking job. It's just like, don't waste this wonderful gap that you have between one job and another job. Stretch that gap as much as you can possibly afford, so that, and people waste that gap all the time. I see all the time people just like, they're on LinkedIn, they go on to find their next job, and then they tell their future employer, yeah, I can start next week. I'm like, really? Don't do that. I mean, unless, of course, some people have such financial hardship that they really have to. But, I mean, that's another question that you should bring up to your brain. You're like, okay, why do you have such financial hardship? Is it because you're living in a house that's twice as big as it really needs it to be? Or you have twice as much crap as you need to be? Or you have a car that's twice as expensive as it should be? You've got a Tesla when you could just have a little Honda for $5,000 or $10,000. So... and on. And this is an opportunity to question all those things. But right. I just think it's a terrible thing to waste. And people do it all the time, jumping from a job to the next job with no break.
Yeah, I think that one of the learnings that I've had doing this research is that, I feel as though I did kind of waste my sabbatical. I didn't know some best practices I think could have allowed me to
well, what would you have done differently?
For me, I think that going from a world where you're at 100% intensity, right, to a world where it's 0% intensity, I think is kind of and you're isolated, is kind of a recipe for a disaster.
Well, you're saying the Japanese experience was 0% intensity? It sounded pretty intense to me.
Just so I spent the first month I did a silent meditation retreat in New Zealand. I was doing hiking and trekking around New Zealand. So you're talking about something that, thoughts and ideas are racing around your mind the entire time. There's a lot of I guess one of the learnings is that it's difficult to take time off.
Oh yeah.
And so you're
especially if you're a go-getter.
Right. Yeah. And so, but it's also, I think on the other side of that, people will say take a sabbatical and you might never work again. It's also difficult. It's difficult to be on vacation, extended vacation or sabbatical. It's difficult to not work. I think
for some people. Yeah. It just depends. When you have this kind of very driven personality, which is the classic Harvard Business School person, for them, they need coaxing. And for other people, they have a tendency toward laziness, and they're the ones who need to have a kick in the pants and to go out there and get a real job. So, it depends on the personality, but I think most of the people that, we're kind of addressing in this audience are people like you and me who are kind of driven and need to be told to sleep. That's another thing, is that a lot of people don't even sleep much. There's all sorts of Ariana Huffington, I think is her name. She's has a book about sleeping and all that. That's a big thing about people telling, turn off your phone. Google has this digital well-being about, turning the phone colors to black and white after 9 p.m. to discourage you from using your phone and all these things. So there's definitely your DJ, you're very timely in this, because this notion that we need to get more sleep, to get away from our phones, and just get away from our kind of robotic nature before the robots take over is I think is a message that is very timely, and is society needs to hear it and do something about it.
Yeah, I think, to your point earlier, ways that, so I see a lot of people that, they're afraid. I mentioned that you get kind of increase in confidence and risk tolerance as appears to be one of the outputs of taking this extended period of time off.
And that's definitely true.
Yeah, and a lot of people they're concerned that they will not be able to get a job, that they have an expiration date, that people won't value their skills, and so I think,
and that's definitely not true.
I mean, I think a lot of people. What's the difference between taking 2 weeks off or applying for a job and starting right away versus like taking 3 months off? There might be some employers that say like, well, what did you do on that time off? And I mean, if you did something that you found value with, and the employer says, I don't want someone like you around in my company, you might have dodged a bullet there. If they're not gonna take what you personally value seriously, then I think that's probably does not forecast good work-life balance at that job. But I think the nefarious thing that happens there is that people will end up making the same decision as far as what type of job and what type of company to work for as they're currently working for, because obviously they're most qualified for something that's similar to what they're currently doing. And so you keep going on the train of a job or an industry or characteristics that kind of got you in the point where you're not happy to begin with. And so if you're gonna get up the courage to make a change, and it actually leads to be more similar than different, that's bad. So I hear a lot of people that have intention to take an extended period of time off. They get kind of scared, or they get themselves wrapped up into job searches because, you left your company, like, oh, you should check out this company. And they find themselves kind of in job application hiring processes that they didn't even want to be in, but then It feels good for someone to
Or the headhunter calls you. Exactly. A lot of headhunters can really pounce on desirable employees.
And so that might be totally fine, but like, what is the value of stepping back and just asking, is this the thing that I wanted to do next? Like, do I want to keep doing this particular thing? Do I want to do it in this way? And even if the answer is yes, would I also just like to spend a little bit more time with my family, or be present for my best friend's wedding and help them plan it or execute it, or
get in shape?
Yeah. Is there just like something else besides that incremental week of work and paycheck that you would value, that you can clear out time for? And I think I know a lot of workaholics. I understand there are people that can't imagine taking time off. I mean, also people, as I said before, like they do work on their sabbatical. So they say, I've always wanted to write a book, and they try to write it, right?
Do you think that some people were talking about the AI revolution and the robots are coming? There's been several books about this recently. What is your take? Do you think that a lot of job displacements, AI is going to displace so many jobs? Will that be the catalyst to all of a sudden, once productivity soars because AI is doing all sorts of stuff that we used to do as human beings, that therefore, in this nirvana kind of world and this utopia that some people envision, that we will then have the ability to then take sabbaticals because the robots are doing the work that we used to do, at least some of the year, right?
I think that there's no evidence that humans will invest productivity into achieving more leisure time. I don't think we have any evidence over the past 100 years
that they're going to trade productivity for leisure time.
Yeah, it's like the horsepower versus fuel economy over the past 20 years prior to 2008. It's like you got more efficient engines, and what we did was we deployed them to make more horsepower because that's what the consumers wanted. Then when the gas prices spiked, they said, well, actually, like we can make them more fuel efficient if that's what you would like, right? And so I think we keep getting more horsepower by having more technology, more processing power, and we're not using that to say, And I think we're going to start taking I think everyone should just take Fridays off. Like, we got much more done than we did 10 years ago. Let's take Fridays off.
So what is your prediction for, let's say, the year 2030, 2040? I mean, do you think, DJ, that we're going to be heading more toward 60-hour work weeks or more toward 20-hour work weeks? Or will it just be more or less the same and we're just going to have sabbaticals?
Well, we're definitely going to have hoverboards by then. I can tell you that much. Okay. But I mean, what I would say is that what I'm kind of modeling and hoping for is the same kind of, hopefully a steeper, but the adoption curve of paid parental leave, right? I mean, I think 20 years ago, 10 years ago, no one had ever heard of paternity leave. And I think that conversation has changed a lot. We have a long way to go on that, right? But I think people who have the privilege to be able to choose between jobs are now being discerning about parental leave, right? And so I think similarly, if we can get companies to see the value in having these policies, which is either going to be demand or supply driven. Either companies are going to say, we've realized that it helps, increase tenure of employees, it helps increase productivity and creativity and help us increase our recruiting. Or employers are going to say, we're a talented employee and we want to work at some place that has great benefits, and a sabbatical policy is one of them. Like one of those levers is going to drive it, or both. And as that happens, then I think that more and more people, it'll be a virtuous cycle. So that's my hope, is that we can follow that kind of adoption curve, something that makes a lot of sense in other countries, paid parental leave. You have extended service leave in Australia, and you have sabbaticals in Europe, that Americans will see the writing on the wall, see that they have permission to do it, that things are going to be okay if they do it, and that it's actually good for them, and it'll be much more prevalent. So that's the goal.
All right, there you go. There's the predictions. Okay, well, thank you again so much. Last reminder for people to go win $1,000 on tourradar.com/WanderLearn, your chance to win $1,000 in travel credits. Just go there, tourradar.com/WanderLearn, and they have been sponsoring this show. And I want to thank DJ Didonna for having come on the show to talk a little bit about sabbaticals, how you can get time off, and what you should do about it, and maybe talk to your employer and make some change happen. I want to give you the last word, DJ, as far as how people can find you, find out your research, stalk you, and any other advice that you might want to give to people as far as practical action items that they might want to take. So all those things. I want to wrap it up on that.
Great. Well, the website is thesabbaticalproject.org. So we're doing work with Professor.
.org. Okay, I'll put a link on the short on the show links. Oh, you said .com will also get you there. Okay.
Yep. And
the
so
Sabbatical Project.
The Sabbatical Project.
Okay. You can't leave out the.
Right.
Okay.
You can, but who knows? And I think, follow us there just on, hearing stories of individuals that have taken sabbaticals. We're working on profiles of companies that offer sabbatical policies. I think it's a lot about permission. How did you get your kind of definition of work and how you engage with work? And so seeing more people that are like other people that have taken sabbaticals and made it work for them is, I think, the key. And, so if you have taken a sabbatical, if you know folks who've taken them, or if you know folks that are interested in taking them, just connect with us, and we're creating a community of people to help support those. So,
awesome. Wonderful. Thank you again, and happy. When is your next sabbatical?
I'm excited about what I'm doing, so
okay.
I'm feeling energized.
You hypocrite. All right. Cool. Thanks for talking, DJ.
Thanks, Prince.
Yeah. And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to wanderlearn.com and click on this episode. Tour Radar sponsored this episode and is also sponsoring an amazing travel contest for the WanderLearn audience. Every month, enter to win a new Tour Radar contest for a chance to win a life-changing travel adventure. To toss your name into the hat, just go to tourradar.com/WanderLearn. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. And here's one more reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and would like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. And now, 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, don't forget to download it. 3, share it. 4, review it, and then 5, sign up for my newsletter at WanderLearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is France Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.